Did you see his back? You guys see that?
Let's just bring them back.
Okay, come back, guys. Paul!
Whoa, Smith.
Underwater is a film that came out in early 2020 that's directed by William Eubank, I think is how you pronounce it. So this is a film that stars Kristen Stewart, Vincent Cassel, and TJ Miller. And the reason why I'm talking about this film and reviewing it is because it's a $50 patron request from my cousin Christian Munoz. Because y'all know that would be the only reason why I watch and review this film. But even with that said, you know, it's kind of nice to have some of my patrons request films that I really wouldn't normally watch or sometimes even touch with a 10-foot pole, because it forces me to kind of get out of my comfort zone and watch something that I go in with pretty low expectations and don't really expect that I'm going to like very much. And with that being said, I don't think that Underwater is an awful movie, but it's really not that good either. But let me begin this review by talking about some of the positive aspects of this movie, because there are some positive aspects in this film. And first and foremost, I think the best aspect of this film are the sequences where they are actually underwater and where the film is actually building suspense. Because, I don't know about you guys, but one of my greatest fears is not only being out in open water and stranded, but it's just the concept of wearing like this underwater suit that weighs me down, and just wearing that claustrophobic type of helmet and just being forced to walk around and explore the underwater space. That has always scared the shit out of me throughout my entire life. So when it comes to that aspect, I think this film did a good job at targeting that specific phobia and that specific anxiety. I mean, I don't think all of the underwater sequences in this film are like amazing or all that great, but there are some sequences where it has this really personal point of view type of style to it that honestly did do a decent job at immersing me into, again, that kind of really claustrophobic and powerless type of feeling. So in that regards, I think it did do a solid job. And also, I think that most of the third act is kind of decent. It does something at the very end that I really didn't like, but I'll get to that in a second. But for the most part, the third act is decent. And the first act, in terms of the way this film, like the first action sequence of this film, where just the underwater ship is essentially like combusting on itself because of all the crazy shit that's happening outside of it, I thought was decently shot. Even though there's some overuse of slow motion in this film that sometimes just felt super Hollywood and didn't really feel all that authentic. It's hard to talk about a positive without eventually going to a negative when it comes to this film. But I guess that's one of the first negatives that I'll go to. And that's the fact that it really feels like Hollywood has its fingerprints all over this film. And that's something that really brought it down for me, because it made it feel incredibly manufactured, really artificial. There's not really that much substance here. I mean, it at least tries. Like, the very beginning of this film tries to establish something with Kristen Stewart's character, but it's really minimal, and basically the entirety of this film is just spent like in survival mode. And that can make it really difficult for me to care about any of the suspense and action, because I really don't give a shit about any of these characters. But I will say again, there are attempts. Like, there's this one attempt with TJ Miller's character, who I'll talk about in a second. But, you know, he kind of passes down this kind of stuffed animal, and it's kind of has this, the stuffed animal has this emotional attachment to it that, you know, at least there's some effort there to have some sort of character substance that is trying to allow the audience to get attached. I didn't really work all that well for me. There's maybe one moment where it worked, but it just kind of got tired out after a while. But at least it tries. Like, I'm not saying that it didn't try at all, but it just wasn't nearly enough. But in regards to TJ Miller's character, in this film, it's like half the time I thought he was genuinely funny, And then the other half, I just thought he was really obnoxious, and I'm like, dude, just please shut the fuck up. Like, you are talking way too much. And it's really not even his fault, because you can tell that the producers and just the overall script of this film, they really wanted him to be that forced comic relief, like, every second. Like, pretty much every time he opens his mouth, he feels a need to be this sense of comic relief. And it just got really tired and annoying after a while. And again, sometimes it works, and I was like, okay, that was funny. That was genuinely funny. And then another time I was like, okay, this is so forced. It's just not really working out. But, you know, at least he wasn't completely obnoxious and completely annoying for the entirety of the movie, because there are films where he is like that. Vincent Cassel is also in this film. And honestly, he was one of the main reasons why I was kind of a little bit excited to watch it, because I know him from some of my favorite films like Irreversible and Black Swan, and even La Haine, which I haven't talked about yet, but one of these days I promise I'll talk about it. But I just think he's a great actor, and he's in some pretty excellent films. So I was expecting something out of him in this film, and, you know, obviously he gives a good performance. There's nothing like crazy standoutish about it, but his character really isn't anything spectacular. He's basically a really respectable captain character that genuinely cares about the crew members of his ship. But that's really as far as it goes. Kristen Stewart's character is okay. Like, in terms of her acting, she's fine in the movie. I know she gets a bunch of shit for being a really stale and bland actress, which I can see. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of movies with her in it, but just judging her from this film alone, yeah, I mean, it's nothing crazy, but she did enough for me to be convinced by her performance. But again, it was nothing really that spectacular either. And her character, you start getting a little bit more substance with the character in the third act of the film, which is why I was saying that I think the third act was mostly solid. Kind of takes a really big dive at the end, which I promise I'll get to in a second. But, you know, she actually starts gaining some sort of substance in the end of the film, and you start to kind of think, oh, this film it actually has something going for it. It's actually trying to build some sort of character. Kind of sucks it didn't do that for the entirety of the film, because that would have helped. That would have helped a lot with the action, because it actually would have made me give somewhat of a shit about what's going to happen to any of these characters. But, you know, I'll take what I can get. It gave you something there in the third act. But not only that, like, I think the third act also has some of the more interesting and cool action sci-fi sequences where the suspense building is pretty effective, and there's just some really cool moments. But like I mentioned, I think the conclusion of this film kind of sucks. Like, I kind of hated the artistic choices, if you want to even call them artistic choices, that were made in the final, like, few minutes of this film, because everything seems to be wrapping up and visually shown to you, and then you get Kristen Stewart narrating, like, what's happening inside her head, and kind of telling the audience, like, the overall themes of the film. And it was really, really annoying. And even just the writing of it was just not good. It felt really just cheap and very Hollywood. And you only hear Kristen Stewart narrate twice in the film. It happens in the beginning. And I remember when that happened, I was like, oh god, if it does this the whole film, I am not going to like this at all. But it didn't do it, like, at all. Like, that was the only time it did it. And then all the way to the very end of the film, it comes back again, essentially out of nowhere. And it just did not work, because not only was the writing and the delivery of it just cringe and stupid, but it was just completely unnecessary, because it was concluding on its own visually. Like, you could tell everything that was occurring and how this film was going to wrap up just through the visuals alone. And then you had this really annoying narration come in, and it felt really forced, really out of place, and pretty poorly written. And I know there's a lot of people out there that say that this film is underrated. I mean, most of them, I think, are casual movie watchers, which is fine, but there's a lot of them out there saying that this film is hugely underrated and should have got more attention. I'm not one of those people, obviously. I think that this film is exactly where it should be. So I'm going to give Underwater a soft 5 out of 10. Honestly, before that narration happened at the end of the film, I was thinking, Dan, this actually might make it to a soft 6. Like, this actually might make a barely fresh rating. Then the narration came in and just took a giant poopy on the film and made it to where I was like, oh, that really dragged it down an entire point. It is now a soft 5 out of 10, and I can't recommend it. But either way, that's my review of Underwater. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say about the film. If you really enjoyed this review, please give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.